This is perfect for the Toronto Blue Jays. They need some help in a lot of areas this offseason, but third base has been a huge talking point for them, and this guy could go a long way towards solving some of those problems. So I'll break down the target, what it'll cost, and how realistic it truly is on this episode of Jays Digest. Welcome in, everybody, to Jays Digest. I'm your host, Peter Vryonis, alongside a host, Nick Gosse. And I want to thank each and every one of you for the support that we've gotten on recent videos. Really appreciate it. All the comments, whether you agree with us, whether you don't agree with us, we truly appreciate each and every one of you who takes the time to interact, which is why I want to ask each and every one of you who is not subscribed to the channel to go ahead and hit that sub button because even if you don't agree with what we always say, even if you have some reservations in the comments section, we should say we are grinding. We are trying to bring you the latest up-to-date news for the Toronto Blue Jays, so you don't want to miss out on that daily Jays content. But Nick, let's get into some talk here about Nolan Arenado, who I have liked, who's one of my favorite players around Major League Baseball. Let me just get that out of the way right now. I think he's a great third baseman. Obviously, he's slowed down a step, but defensively, I think he's second to none. And in the right situation, in the right environment, with the right players around him in the lineup, I think he can get back to a semblance of his old self that we saw in Colorado and early on in his career with St. Louis once he did go over there. So, Nick, it's a very interesting talking point. We know that the Jays need an everyday third baseman. They can go the committee route again, but I think they're better off if they just have a guy that's there every day that you can pencil into the lineup and know exactly what you're going to get out of.
Yeah, and reports came out regarding the St. Louis Cardinals being open to moving Nolan Arenado, and he is on a big contract, which we'll discuss, of course. But again, we'll discuss the contract in a minute. But I want to start with this today: a rumor slash report. The conversation dropped surrounding Nolan Arenado. Should the Jays consider trading for Nolan Arenado? Eric Kratz shares his thoughts with Sportsnet Ben on there. He said, "What he brings to Toronto is special to me. I think he's going to have a bounce back year. He makes everyone else better because he is an absolute competitor." So rumors are starting to fly in the sense of how he would be a good fit for the Toronto Blue Jays. We've heard some things earlier on in the offseason from Ben Smith, Shai Davidi, how they've kicked tires on third base options in the trade market, how they're getting very interested in the trade market. And Peter, what are your thoughts on this here? Again, I know you're a huge fan of Nolan Arenado, of course. We'll dive into his stats here and again the lofty contract that he holds here. But what are your initial thoughts on this report here from Eric Kratz, or this rumor basically saying that, hey, makes a ton of sense for Toronto. There is another one here as well from a CBS writer also linking the Jays, saying they're in a tough spot trying to convince Vladdy they need an everyday third baseman. We'll dive into that in a minute, but I think the fit makes some sense, but there's going to be a lot of reservations because of his not horrible, bad for his standards season last year where he was basically a league average hitter on, 2.5 WAR, making a ton of money.
Yeah, he's making a ton of money, and he's not the same player that he once was, which could be a red flag to some people. But I I look at it this way. Okay, yeah, it's a big financial commitment, but it would be for 3 years, as opposed to if you were to sign an Alex Bregman, for example, who you would probably have to give a 6 year contract to. So there are ways out of this, which we will discuss. But Nolan Arenado, like I mentioned in the intro, I think in the right situation, Nick, with Vladdy around him, with Bo Bichette in the lineup as well. Let's say you add another piece throughout free agency. I think you have a really good lineup there, and I wouldn't say similar to George Springer, but he's starting to lose a step. He's still only 33 years old. He's still got a couple of years left in him at a high level, I believe, and a 10-time Gold Glover. So the fact we saw how effective Matt Chapman was next to Bo Bichette. It helps out Bo a lot defensively too to have an elite defensive third baseman. And even though Arenado's defense is not the same as it was, it's still elite and it's still at the top of Major League Baseball standards when we're talking about third baseman. So not the same player. It might be a little bit rich for the Toronto Blue Jays to spend 25-ish million dollars on a guy like that, but I think it makes sense, and I would like to see it happen because he's a leader, he's a competitor, and he's a guy with playoff experience as well with the Cardinals. So it makes sense to me, and I don't think it'll cost you that much to go out and acquire him either.
Yeah, I mean, let's keep in mind, yeah, he's 33. He had a very bad season last year. I'm saying very bad. I'm talking about his standards. Of course, he was a perennial All-Star. He is 2 years removed from a 7.7 WAR season. He's not like he had a 7 WAR season in 2019 or even 2018 or anything like that. He had it as recent as 2 years ago in 2022 with the Cardinals, where he hit for 30 home runs. He hit for an 891 OPS with obviously some of the best defense MVP finalists. I believe he was top 3. Yeah, he was third in MVP voting. So back-to-back years now, he still plays every day. Only a 2.4 and a 2.5 WAR. The defensive step has definitely dropped, but most importantly, the hitting has dropped. Even though he did hit 26 home runs in 2023, I still think it makes some sense. And this little paragraph here, you can see here, they're trying to convince Juan Soto. We know that. I'm still not really sold on that. I think he's probably going to go to the Mets at this point. But he makes a play. If you're going all in, it can hurt to make a play for Arenado. Clement is currently slotted at third, but he's a utility man. Arenado could stay at here beside Bichette, who is surely in line for a bounce-back season the year hits before it hits free agency. If they are stuck on a payroll and all these different things, if they go out and get Arenado, they go out and get, let's say, for the sake of argument, Santander, and then you have Bo Bichette, and then you build around that. If you're bouncing on or if you're betting on a bounce-back year, and he puts up a 5 or 6 WAR, similar to what Marcus Semien gave the Jays back in 2021. Your team could instantly flip on a dime like that. If you have a great player in Vladdy, you have Bo Bichette putting up 5 WAR, you have Nolan Arenado putting up 6, and that is a very solid infield. So I like him as a buy low guy because you're buying him at his lowest point. If you're the Arizona Cardinals, football, if you're the St. Louis Cardinals, you might want to get rid of his, we call it a monstrous contract. It's at the point now where players are getting such high amounts of money that this at one point seemed like an albatross contract at 8 years, 260. $21 million a year is nothing at this point. Anthony Santander is going to get $21 million a year, and he put up a 2.9 WAR last season for the Orioles. So, yeah, you'd be paying him into his 2027 season where the money trails off a little bit, but it's a good point comparing it to free agency. Players are getting so much money now, it's basically like a signing, although we will dive into in a minute here who they would have to give up for Arenado would be the big question here, because otherwise you're probably better off signing a guy like Alex Bregman if the price is very steep.
And let me remind you, all that are watching this, that the Colorado Rockies traded him away to the St. Louis Cardinals when he was in his prime. He was one of the best players in baseball, a perennial MVP candidate, as you can see on the right-hand side of his baseball reference page right there. And what did the Colorado Rockies do when they traded him away? They gave the Cardinals $50 million in bonus cash. They ate $50 million of that Arenado contract. Now, I'm not saying St. Louis is going to be so quick to jump the gun on that they'll want to eat some money, but they're not going to get Paul Goldschmidt back. They're looking to trade Ryan Helsley. I think they're headed towards a rebuild, and paying a 33-year-old with a declining skill set $21 million plus dollars, that doesn't make too much sense for them. I think they're going to try to head in a different direction. So I'm not going to set the unreasonable expectation that half of the money is going to be eaten for an Arenado deal here, but it's possible if the Cardinals want to, let's say, get back a better prospect as opposed to a mid-tier prospect just to unload the contract. They're going to have to eat some money. And off the top of my head, Nick, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but I can't think of a team around Major League Baseball that would just jump the gun on this deal. Maybe there are some teams that need third base help that are slipping my mind here, but none more than the Blue Jays, who want to get back to the playoffs, who have a noticeable hole at that position. As that article said right there, Ernie Clement is currently the everyday third baseman. No disrespect to him, but he's been a utility guy his entire career. He matched his career wins above replacement just last season
3.4,
because he was an everyday guy. He had to be out of necessity. The Jays had nothing else in that department, so they had to force a guy who's a utility player into an everyday role. And for a team that wants to get back to the playoffs, for a team that wants to sell a winning team to the fan base, that's not how you do it with utility guys. You do it with everyday proven players, and that's exactly what Arenado is. And who knows, maybe he could bounce back, and maybe it looks like a steal at the end of that.
Yeah, I mean, you can make the argument, Clement, yeah, he had a higher WAR than Arenado last year, but again, you're bouncing on the fact that Arenado's going to bounce back. I don't think he's loved the situation in St. Louis the past couple of years. It's been a very weird one, and not too much protection over there. And if you have the Jays with Vladdy, a bit more protection. And I want to ask you all watching, and yourself, of course, Peter here, on a trade, what kind of player framework would you propose for a guy like Nolan Arenado? Again, whether you want to give them, maybe the Jays want to eat some of the money, show their fan base, hey, or maybe they just want to take it and they'll eat all the money or most of the money because they don't want to give up as good of a prospect. But the prospect pool is still, bottom 10 in baseball, according to, all these different things. However, they did replenish their system. I don't think they have any of their key prospect guys, but I'm thinking of a guy like Charles McAdoo, a guy maybe, I wouldn't give up Bonilla, but like someone like that, like a mid-level prospect, is probably going to take a little bit more than that. But at this point, I don't think there's many teams that are in the market for, Nolan Arenado out there. Maybe, some teams that have a ton of cash or some teams that want to try to bounce back into the competitive window. But I don't know if you have any thoughts, and maybe if you do a Ricky Tiedemann for Nolan Arenado swap,
Yeah.
maybe something of that nature. This is the question, and this is the part of this report and all these different rumors that makes it a bit more difficult, is who do the Jays give up in an already depleted farm system here?
Yeah, it's crazy that we're mentioning Ricky Tiedemann's name in this because when I said that the Jays should look to trade him for Brian Reynolds, I got a lot of flack in the comment section, and you weren't on my side on
Nope.
that decision either, Nick. But I guess hindsight is 2020. I don't know if we still make that move now, knowing what we know. But yeah, Charles McAdoo is definitely a name that could interest the St. Louis Cardinals. They're probably familiar with him having been a prospect in the NL Central as well. Alan Roden is a guy who has been rising up the ranks for the Blue Jays. Power hitting, left-handed hitting outfielder that could be of interest. Very toolsy, got a big arm, decent speed. Uh, yeah, there's you don't want to give up pitching prospects though, if you're the Blue Jays, in my opinion, because you are so thin in that regard, and I would rather just take on the entire contract and give away a Charles McAdoo as opposed to giving up on Ricky Tiedemann this early because I know he's dealt with his injuries. I know that maybe he hasn't been in the lineup as much as we would have liked from him thus far, but he's still got that electric arm with a left-handed delivery, which is very hard to find. And there was a point in time when he was a top 30, bordering on a top 20 prospect in baseball. I don't know if I'd give that guy up, especially just at 21 years of age, like he is right now, or 22 years of age, whatever he is. But he's young. He's got time to develop. The Jays have their position players, I think, especially Relvis Martinez. You got Addison Barger as well,
And
who
that's
is
the name. I'm going to
already.
interrupt you really quick.
Yeah,
Arelvis
go ahead.
Martinez, now that I'm starting to think of it more, might be somebody that they dangle in a trade here for Nolan Arenado.
I
It would
wouldn't
be a
do that. I wouldn't do
and
that.
it would be a tough pill to swallow, but it's, if you're the St. Louis Cardinals here, I mean, Arelvis has the highest upside. He's one of their top prospects. He's number 2 on the list. It might take it, and you wouldn't do it if the Cardinals
I,
say we do the deal 1-for-1 of Relvis for Nolan Arenado. That's the question, because if they do, if it's so, it would be a 1-for-1 in this scenario. The Jays come out, you get a guy for the next 2 to 3 years. I don't love the deal either, but when we're thinking about realistic trades here, I think you'd have to maybe even a guy like Joey Loperfido or Will Wagner or some of the guys they got from the other trade away. Maybe someone who's a bit more MLB ready, but I think of Relvis's name. That's who the
I
Cardinals would be
I
asking
just don't
for.
think I don't think it'll cost that much. Maybe a few years ago it would have, but let's face it, Arenado's not as attractive as he was a few years ago in terms of a trade asset. He's making a lot of money. You said he's 2 years removed from a 7.7 WAR, but that's a long time, especially considering that he's nearing his mid 30s here. So I like the player and I'm lobbying for it to happen, but at the right price, Nick. I'm not giving up a Relvis Martinez. I'm not giving up a top 5 prospect in the system for a guy who's making $20 million a year, who had a 2.5 wins above replacement last season. I'm just not going to pull the trigger on that if I'm the Jays front office. That's the kind of move that gets you fired because you're thinking about trying to compete, trying to save your job. And then you fast forward a few years from now, Arenado is a shell of himself, a la George Springer, what we're seeing right now. And then Aurelvis Martinez is pimping 35 to 40 home runs a year for the St. Louis Cardinals. I don't think he's quite there yet as a player. I think that 80 game suspension that he had really set him back in terms of development. But I think he's got big time ceiling. I really do. And I'm not ready to give up on him. I'm not ready to give up on Tiedemann or any of those top five guys that you see on that list right there. So, Arenado, I'm going to do it for the right price because it fills an immediate need for the Blue Jays. But I would take on the whole contract if that meant keeping one of my top prospects.
Yeah, I don't think it gets done either. I do think that is the player that the Cardinals would at least be lobbying for, sorry, as they start the negotiations. But my prediction, if the deal goes down, something similar to a Charles McAdoo type prospect. I think
Yeah,
that is I think that's the level. Maybe two, maybe McAdoo and some other
I'm good at
flyer in the
that.
top
I'm
20 as
good
well.
with that.
Let us know down below what your thoughts are. Again, would you do what's the out of these prospects, which is the guy you would give up, the most willing to give up out of these guys? Let us know down below, and also let us know, do you want Nolan Arenado, or are you worried he's going to be washed by the time the Jays acquire him? Let us know. See you guys later.